The conference room door clicked shut behind me with a finality that made my stomach tighten. I'd been mid-sentence, explaining our implementation timeline to the Westfield logistics team, when my boss Gerald Hutchins appeared in the doorway. His expression carried that particular brand of condescension I'd come to recognize over 18 months at Twilight Technologies. "Jenna, a word. Now." The client's chief operating officer, Helen Marquette, had raised her eyebrows slightly. Her silk blouse caught the afternoon light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and I noticed the way her pen stilled mid-notation on her legal pad. The moment stretched uncomfortably. I'd excused myself, following Gerald down the corridor past glass-walled offices where my colleagues pretended not to watch. Olivia from accounting suddenly found her spreadsheet fascinating. Bryant from marketing swiveled his chair to face his monitor with theatrical timing. We stopped at his door. He didn't invite me inside. The hallway smelled of the vanilla air freshener our facilities team sprayed every afternoon at 3 o'clock. Gerald's cologne, something aggressively woody and expensive, mixed with it unpleasantly. "You ask too many questions," he said, his smirk sharp enough to cut. "Makes us look unprepared. Like we don't know our own product." I'd asked 3 questions during that meeting. 3 clarifications about their data migration concerns, their security protocols, their integration requirements. Questions that would have prevented disasters down the line. Questions that Marquette's technical director, a sharp-eyed woman named Claudia Westbrook, had been actively writing down with what looked like genuine interest. I said nothing. Experience had taught me that Gerald didn't want dialogue. He wanted compliance. His tie was slightly askew, a burgundy silk number with subtle paisley that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. I focused on that imperfection rather than the anger building behind my ribs. "Get back to your desk. I'll handle Westfield from here." That was Tuesday, October 7th. I remember because I'd circled it on my desk calendar later that afternoon, sitting in my cubicle with the fluorescent lights humming overhead. The calendar was one of those promotional freebies from an office supply company, featuring inspirational quotes that usually felt hollow. October's offering read, "Success comes to those who persevere." The irony wasn't lost on me as I drew my red circle around the date, pressing hard enough that the marker bled slightly through to Wednesday's square. Something about the dismissal felt different. More pointed. More final. My coffee had gone cold in its mug, the one my graduate school roommate had given me with "Data doesn't like" printed in bold letters. I stared at those words for a long time that afternoon. The office stretched around me in beige monotony. Twilight Technologies occupied 3 floors of a downtown building that always smelled faintly of coffee and recycled air. The HVAC system had a particular rattle in autumn that maintenance kept promising to fix but never did. I'd joined the sales engineering team straight out of graduate school, drawn by promises of innovation and growth. The recruiter had used words like cutting-edge and collaborative culture and rapid advancement opportunities. What I'd found instead was a hierarchy built on ego rather than expertise. Gerald had been promoted to regional sales director 8 months ago. Before that, he'd been tolerable. He'd occasionally asked for technical input, even credited team contributions in all-hands meetings. Afterward, he'd become territorial about client relationships, cutting team members out of conversations, claiming credit for successful implementations while deflecting blame for failures. I'd watched 2 colleagues leave in frustration. Stephanie had cried in the women's restroom on her last day, telling me to get out while you still can. Ian had simply stopped showing up one Monday, his resignation email arriving at 9 a.m. sharp with no explanation beyond pursuing other opportunities. I'd considered following them. My LinkedIn profile had been updated 3 times in the past 2 months. I'd taken calls from recruiters, gone to one interview at a competing firm where the hiring manager had seemed promising until she'd casually mentioned their aggressive sales culture with unmistakable pride. But I needed this job. My student loans wouldn't pay themselves, $53,000 remaining, to be exact, a number I checked obsessively every Sunday evening. The market for technical sales engineers had contracted sharply after the industry downturn last spring. 2 friends from my cohort were driving for rideshare services while sending out applications. Another had moved back with her parents in Ohio. So I stayed. I documented everything. I kept my head down. I maintained a folder on my personal laptop labeled Work Notes that contained detailed records of every project, every client interaction, every instance where my contributions had been minimized or erased. I told myself it was professional caution. Looking back, I realized some part of me knew I'd need that documentation eventually. Wednesday passed in artificial normalcy. I updated product specifications, cross-referencing our software capabilities against competitor offerings. I reviewed contract templates, noting clauses that had caused problems in previous negotiations. I prepared presentations Gerald would present without acknowledging my work, a slide deck about cloud infrastructure scalability that took me 6 hours to research and build. He'd deliver it Friday to a prospect in the healthcare sector, probably without reading past the title slide beforehand. My desk phone rang twice with internal calls. Once from Olivia asking about expense report procedures, once from a sales associate named Carl who needed help understanding our API documentation. Both conversations felt surreal in their mundanity, like normal life continuing while something fundamental had shifted beneath the surface. Thursday brought a sales team meeting where Gerald announced our quarterly targets with theatrical enthusiasm. He'd worn his power suit, a charcoal three-piece with chalk stripes that he reserved for performances. He paced the conference room like a motivational speaker, gesturing broadly at slides showing aggressive growth projections. Westfield Logistics wasn't mentioned. When Olivia asked about major pending deals, Gerald glossed over the question with vague assurances about strong pipeline momentum. I sat in my usual chair near the back, taking notes more from habit than necessity. The meeting room's whiteboard still showed residue from last week's brainstorming session. Someone had written "Think Big" in green marker and never erased it. The phrase had faded to a ghostly outline. Friday morning arrived with deceptive calm. Sunrise had painted my apartment windows gold, and traffic on my commute had been surprisingly light. I'd arrived at the office by 7:30, enjoying the quiet hours before the main workforce arrived. I was reviewing competitor analysis reports. Nexus Solutions had released a new feature set, and I was documenting the implications for our positioning, when Gerald's office door slammed open hard enough that the sound echoed across the entire floor. Dawson. Conference room. Now. Every head turned. The sudden silence was profound. Someone's keyboard clacking stopped mid-word. The coffee machine in the break area finished its brewing cycle with a final hiss that sounded thunderous in the stillness. Gerald's face had gone crimson, a vein pulsing visibly at his temple. His shirt was already rumpled despite the early hour, his tie loosened. He stormed toward the glass-walled meeting space without checking whether I followed. I saved my document, Old Habits from Too Many Computer Crashes, and stood, aware of the sudden silence surrounding my desk. Bryant caught my eye from across the cubicle farm and mouthed good luck with genuine concern. Inside the conference room, Gerald paced like a caged animal. His leather dress shoes squeaked against the polished floor with each sharp turn. His tie hung loose, his jacket discarded somewhere, probably thrown across his desk chair in the fury of whatever had triggered this confrontation. I closed the door carefully behind me, noting the way the sound-dampening seal created instant auditory isolation from the office beyond. Why did they sign with our competitor? The words came out half-shouted, half-accusatory. Spittle flew with the force of it. Westfield just sent termination notice. They're going with Nexus Solutions. 3-year contract. 7 figures. Gone. He held his phone in one hand, knuckles wide around the case. The screen showed an email inbox, though I couldn't read the specific message from where I stood. I remained standing near the door, keeping my voice level. What reason did they give? Reason? He turned on me, eyes wild with an almost manic energy. They said we didn't understand their needs. That our presentation was surface level. That Nexus asked better questions and provided actual solutions. He spat the words like poison. You were in that meeting, Jenna. You were supposed to support me. Instead, you undermined my authority with your constant interruptions. The accusation landed between us. Outside the glass walls, I could see colleagues trying not to look directly at us while obviously tracking every gesture. I felt something shift in my chest, not anger, not yet, but a cold clarity. The kind that comes when a situation you've been dreading finally materializes and you realize you've already prepared for it without consciously knowing. I asked 3 questions about their infrastructure requirements. Then you removed me from the room. Because you made us look incompetent. His hand slammed the table hard enough that the sound reverberated. A water glass someone had left from an earlier meeting jumped slightly, droplets sloshing over the rim. I had that deal locked. Marquette loved my pitch. You could see it in her face, the way she was nodding along. Then you had to play technical expert and plant doubt in their minds. I studied him across 6 feet of conference table. Gerald Hutchins, 42 years old, 15 years in sales, promoted based on charm rather than competence. A man who'd built his career on appropriating other people's work and blame-shifting when things collapsed. He'd been married once, there were photos on his desk of a family vacation from years ago, but the wedding ring had disappeared around the time of his promotion. Office gossip suggested the divorce had been expensive and acrimonious. Did you follow up on their data migration concerns? I asked quietly. What? Their legacy systems. The integration timeline. The security protocols they mentioned. Did you address any of that after I left? His face darkened further, the crimson deepening to something close to purple. I don't need technical interrogation from you. I needed you to smile, nod, and let me close the deal. That's not how enterprise software works, Gerald. These aren't impulse purchases. They're multi-year investments requiring detailed technical alignment. I kept my hands loose at my sides, maintaining non-threatening body language despite the tension crackling through the room. Westfield is a logistics company managing real-time tracking for 3,000 vehicles across 17 states. They can't afford implementation failures. Don't lecture me about sales. He moved closer, using his height as intimidation. At 6'2", he typically loomed over people, a tactic I'd seen him employ in multiple contexts. You know what this makes me look like? I have to explain to the executive team why we lost our biggest prospect this quarter. Diane Foster is already sending meeting requests. The VP of Operations wants a postmortem. And you're going to help me craft that explanation. The threat hung explicit in the air. I was being positioned as the scapegoat. The overeager junior engineer who'd torpedoed a sure thing with inappropriate questions. Gerald would spin this narrative upward while I absorbed the professional consequences. I should have felt panic. Instead, I felt something colder. Sharper. The sensation of pieces clicking into place. I'd like to review the meeting recording before we proceed, I said. Gerald's expression flickered, a micro-expression of something that might have been fear before his features reset to anger. What recording? All client meetings are recorded for training and quality assurance. Company Policy, Section 4.7 of the Sales Procedures Manual. The system archives them automatically to the shared drive under client name and date. I kept my tone professionally neutral, the voice I used when explaining technical specifications to non-technical executives. I'd like to review what was actually said before we characterize the meeting to leadership. The color drained from his face, then rushed back darker. His jaw worked silently, and I watched his throat bob with a hard swallow. You're not reviewing anything. This conversation is over. Get back to work. I didn't move. My grandmother had taught me years ago that staying still sometimes requires more courage than acting. With respect, if we're discussing my performance in that meeting, I have the right to review the documentation. HR Policy 12.3, Subsection B. Employee performance discussions must include access to relevant supporting materials. He stared at me, and I watched him calculate. Push back harder and risk me escalating to HR. Let it go and hope I drop the matter. His hands opened and closed at his sides, forming fists then releasing. A muscle jumped in his jaw. Fine. Review whatever you want. Won't change the outcome. He grabbed his jacket from the chair where he'd apparently thrown it upon entering. You're off the Westfield account. Permanently. Consider yourself reassigned to internal projects until further notice. He left, the door swinging shut with barely controlled violence. The magnetic catch stuttered twice before fully sealing. I stood alone in the conference room, my heart finally catching up with the confrontation. My hands trembled slightly. I pressed them flat against the cool table surface, breathing deliberately. 4 counts in, hold 4, 4 counts out. The meditation technique I'd learned from a workplace wellness seminar that Gerald had mocked as hippie nonsense. Through the glass, I saw Bryant deliberately not looking my direction. Olivia had disappeared entirely, probably to the restroom to avoid witnessing the aftermath. Then I walked to my desk, opened my laptop, and navigated to the company's internal database. The meeting recording system stored files for 90 days before archival to long-term storage. The interface was clunky, designed by the IT department 5 years ago and never updated, but functional. Tuesday's session appeared third on the chronological list, Westfield Logistics initial presentation October 7, 25, 2 p.m. Conference Room B. I downloaded it to my local drive, watching the progress bar creep across my screen. The file was large, video quality had been upgraded last year to accommodate detailed product demonstrations. When the download completed, I created a backup copy on my personal cloud storage. Then I started watching. The recording showed exactly what I remembered, but seeing it objectively, from the fixed camera angle mounted above the display screen, added new context. Gerald's opening pitch, confident and polished, hitting the major feature highlights. He was genuinely good at this part, I had to admit. Charismatic, enthusiastic, painting compelling visions of improved operational efficiency. Marquette's team asking increasingly specific questions about implementation. Her technical director Claudia asking about database architecture. Her operations manager, a younger man whose nameplate read Gordon Fisher, raising concerns about training timelines. Gerald deflecting with generalities and promises to follow up with detailed documentation. His smile staying bright but his eyes showing the first hints of strain. Then my questions. Calm, professional, directly addressing their stated concerns about data security and system integration. Marquette leaning forward with interest, her entire posture shifting from polite attention to active engagement. Her technical director nodding, taking notes with what looked like relief that someone was finally addressing substantive issues. Gerald's face tightening with each question I asked. His jaw setting. His fingers drumming against his leather portfolio. Then his interruption. Jenna, could you grab those specification sheets from my office? Me hesitating, recognizing the dismissal but caught off guard by the sudden request. His hand gesture toward the door. Now, please. Top drawer, right side of my desk. The Westfield folder. The recording continued after I left. Gerald returning to his pitch, now without technical backup. Marquette asking follow-up questions he couldn't answer. What's your approach to handling legacy database schemas? Claudia asked, and Gerald responded with something about flexible architecture that was technically meaningless. How do you manage encryption key rotation during migration? Gordon asked, and Gerald promised to have our technical team provide detailed protocols, except that technical team was currently searching his office for a folder that probably didn't exist. His increasing reliance on vague assurances and sales rhetoric. The energy draining from the room as Marquette's team realized they weren't getting the substantive answers they needed. The meeting concluding 15 minutes early with polite but non-committal handshakes. Marquette's smile had been professional but cool. Her technical director hadn't smiled at all. I watched it twice. Made notes with timestamps. Checked the audio levels to ensure everything was clear and audible. Then I did something I'd never done before. I accessed the sales tracking system, a dashboard that theoretically all employees could view but that most never bothered with, and pulled every deal Gerald had managed since his promotion. Win rates. Client retention. Implementation success metrics. Revenue per account. Customer satisfaction survey responses. The data painted a damning picture, a 43% closure rate, 15 points below team average. Client satisfaction scores consistently in the bottom quartile. 3 major accounts lost to competitors within 6 months of signing, including a manufacturing firm that had publicly posted about their negative experience on industry review sites. The pattern was unmistakable once laid out chronologically. Gerald succeeded on accounts where technical staff stayed embedded throughout implementation. He failed when he operated independently, relying on charm over substance. The correlation was statistically significant. I ran the numbers through a basic analysis tool just to confirm. I created a folder on my desktop. Labeled it Westfield Documentation. Added the meeting recording, the sales metric spreadsheet, and my contemporaneous notes from every client interaction I'd supported under Gerald's leadership. 23 separate files spanning 8 months. Everything dated, everything factual, everything documented in real time rather than reconstructed after the fact. Then I waited. The weekend passed in strange limbo. I cleaned my apartment with unusual thoroughness, scrubbing grout and organizing closets. I went for long runs along the river trail, trying to exhaust the anxious energy. Sunday evening I sat on my balcony watching the sunset paint the downtown skyline in shades of amber and rose, wondering if I'd still have a job by Friday. Wondering if I'd done the right thing by preparing to challenge Gerald's narrative. Wondering if documentation and facts would matter against his seniority and connections. Monday morning brought an email summons to the executive floor. The message came from Diane Foster, Senior Vice President of Sales Operations. Please meet with me and HR Director Walter Simmons at 10 a.m. Gerald Hutchins will be present. Westfield Logistics Account Review. The email's timestamp showed it had been sent Sunday night at 11:47 p.m. Foster was notorious for working brutal hours, often sending emails well past midnight. The subject line's clinical language, account review rather than performance discussion, felt deliberately neutral. I arrived 5 minutes early, wearing my best suit, a charcoal gray number I'd bought for graduate school interviews and rarely had occasion to use. The jacket's shoulders felt stiff from months in the closet. I'd spent extra time on my appearance that morning, understanding that professionalism would be assessed alongside my documentation. My hair was pulled back in a neat bun. My minimal jewelry, simple studs, a watch my parents had given me for graduation, conveyed serious competence. I carried a leather portfolio containing printed documentation. Everything I'd compiled, organized with labeled tabs. Technology could fail, projectors malfunction, computers freeze, but paper remained reliably accessible. The executive suite occupied the building's top floor, all hardwood and leather furniture that smelled of furniture polish and power. The elevator doors opened directly into a reception area where Foster's assistant, a woman named Catherine with perfect posture and steel gray hair, sat behind a desk of polished mahogany. Original artwork hung on walls painted a sophisticated slate blue. The windows here didn't show the same industrial views as the sales floor below, instead, they framed downtown's skyline with careful composition. Catherine showed me into a corner conference room with windows overlooking the city. Morning light streamed across a table that could seat 12 but today held only 3 occupied chairs. Foster sat at the head of the table, 50-something and sharp-eyed, with the bearing of someone who'd built her career on results rather than politics. Her suit was navy, perfectly tailored, with a strand of pearls that looked inherited rather than purchased. Walter Simmons occupied the chair to her right, his HR director neutrality already in place, pleasant expression, notepad open, pen ready. Gerald arrived exactly at 10, his confidence restored. He'd clearly spent the weekend crafting his narrative. His suit was immaculate, his tie perfectly knotted, his leather portfolio embossed with his initials. He nodded to Foster and Simmons with easy familiarity, the gesture of someone comfortable in executive spaces. When his eyes landed on me, they held a mixture of disdain and pity. The look of someone who'd already won. We took seats across from each other, the polished table reflecting our opposing positions like a symbolic divide. Foster opened a tablet, her expression unreadable. "Thank you for coming. We're reviewing the Westfield situation. Gerald has provided his account of what happened. Jenna, I'd like to hear yours." Gerald leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. The posture of someone confident in victory. One corner of his mouth quirked upward almost imperceptibly. I opened my portfolio. I prepared documentation. Foster's eyebrow rose slightly. Proceed. The Westfield meeting occurred Tuesday, October 7th, at 2 p.m. in Conference Room B. I was asked to provide technical support for what was positioned as a preliminary presentation. During the session, I asked 3 questions directly related to concerns raised by their team about data migration, security protocols, and integration timelines. I slid the first document across the table, my meeting notes, timestamped and detailed. Foster picked it up, scanning quickly with practiced efficiency. Approximately 18 minutes into the meeting, I was removed from the room by Mr. Hutchins under the pretext of retrieving specification documents from his office. The session concluded 7 minutes later without addressing the technical concerns that had been raised. Gerald's expression darkened slightly, but he maintained his relaxed posture. That's a very selective interpretation. Foster raised one hand without looking at him. Let her finish. The gesture's casual authority silenced him more effectively than any reprimand. On Friday, October 10th, I was informed that Westfield had signed with Nexus Solutions. Mr. Hutchins attributed this outcome to my questions undermining his pitch and planting doubt in the client's mind. However, the meeting recording tells a different story. I pulled out my laptop, queued up the relevant timestamp. With your permission? Foster nodded. Please. I played the section showing my questions, Marquette's engaged responses, her technical director's active note-taking. Then Gerald's interruption and my departure. Then the post-departure segment where Gerald failed to address increasingly specific technical concerns, his answers growing more vague and performative as the questions became more detailed. The room fell silent except for the audio of Gerald's voice promising to circle back and provide comprehensive documentation and have our technical team reach out directly. Promises made to buy time, to defer, to avoid admitting gaps in knowledge. Foster watched without expression, but I saw her fingers tap once against the tablet in what might have been irritation. Simmons took careful notes, his pen moving in small, precise strokes. Gerald's face had gone pale, his arms slowly uncrossing. Additionally, I continued after the video concluded, I've compiled performance metrics for accounts managed by Mr. Hutchins since his promotion to regional director last February. The third document showed the win rates, retention numbers, and satisfaction scores. I'd created a simple chart, nothing fancy, just data visualized clearly. The pattern was undeniable. Gerald's numbers had declined steadily since his promotion, inversely correlated with his increasing tendency to exclude technical staff from client relationships. I'm not suggesting these outcomes are solely attributable to management approach, I said carefully, maintaining professional objectivity. However, there appears to be a consistent correlation between technical engagement level and client retention. Accounts where technical staff were included throughout the sales process showed significantly higher satisfaction and renewal rates. Accounts where technical staff were minimized or excluded showed corresponding decreases. Foster studied the documentation for a long moment. The silence stretched. Outside the windows, I could see a construction crane moving slowly across the skyline. Gerald shifted in his chair, the leather creaking softly. When she looked up, her gaze fixed on Gerald with the focus of someone reassessing a previous conclusion. Mr. Hutchins, you told me that Ms. Dawson's inappropriate questioning caused Westfield to lose confidence in our capabilities. You characterized her behavior as insubordinate and damaging to client relationships. Her voice remained level, but something cold had entered it. This recording suggests otherwise. Gerald's jaw worked. She undermined my authority in front of the client. She answered their technical questions, Foster cut in, her voice hardening. Questions you were unprepared to address. Questions that were directly relevant to a 7-figure purchasing decision. Then you removed the only person in the room who could have provided the detailed information they clearly wanted. I was managing the relationship. You were protecting your ego, Foster said, closing her tablet with a decisive click. Walter, I want Gerald's full personnel file, client feedback for the past 8 months, and recordings from recent meetings. Today. Authority shifted instantly. Simmons nodded, scribbling notes. By 3 p.m., he confirmed. Foster stood, and we all did the same. Ms. Dawson, thank you for your documentation, it's excellent. Please return to your desk. We'll follow up this week. Turning to Gerald, she added, you'll remain here. I gathered my materials, feeling Gerald's glare on my back as I walked out. The soft click of the door behind me felt like punctuation, the end of one story, the beginning of another. By Tuesday, Gerald's office was empty. HR's email cited pursuing other opportunities, corporate code for termination. Whispers filled the halls, I stayed quiet, focused on work. Then Foster called. Westfield Logistics wanted back in, on one condition, if Jenna Dawson can lead the conversation this time. By Friday, I'd rebuilt the entire proposal, working late into the night. When I presented it alone the following Tuesday, I focused on substance, not showmanship, answering questions, addressing concerns, admitting uncertainty, then following up fast. Westfield signed a 3-year, higher-value contract. Foster later called me in. Well done, she said, smiling. You made them feel heard. Then she offered me a new role, principal sales engineer. Months later, results spoke for themselves, higher win rates, record client retention, and genuine collaboration between sales and engineering. Gerald resurfaced on LinkedIn, full of bluster at a smaller firm, but I'd moved on. From my new office overlooking the city, I finally understood, questions aren't signs of weakness. They're the foundation of real understanding, and the quiet power behind every lasting success.